let's see. This season, we've had Kevin Durant and Draymond Green arguing on the bench about KD's free agency holding the Warriors hostage. We've watched the Celtics call each other out, apologize, and then do it all over again as players openly told the media how little fun they were having. And those are the supposedly happy teams, the ones that did really well in the playoffs last year. So what about the Blazers? Portland got swept in each of the last two postseasons. Last year was particularly embarrassing as it was six-seeded New Orleans doing the sweeping. Guys like Damian Lillard and McCollum certainly could have pointed fingers or allowed the constant questions about whether it was time to trade one of them seep into the locker room. They didn't. They could have been shook by owner Paul Allen dying just 3 days before the regular season or fed into the subsequent uncertainty over whether the franchise might move, but they didn't. They could have fallen apart when Jusuf Nurkic broke his leg, an injury that took a giant wrecking ball through the very center of their starting lineup. They didn't. So when over the weekend, Portland lost Game 3 against OKC by giving up a torrent of threes, or when they had to listen to Russell Westbrook point and holler, or when they had to watch Paul George hammer down a double-clutch reverse in garbage time, well, there are teams that would have been shaken by all of that, started sniping at each other or doubting their approach. Instead, the Blazers came out for Game 4 looking quietly unruffled. No trash talk, no arguing with officials. CJ would later say they decided as players they simply weren't going to talk to anyone not wearing their uniform. And when their backcourt struggled a little bit early, the other guys picked them up. Al-Farouq Aminu's name is Nigerian. It means the chief has arrived. And he certainly did that last night with this shot just before halftime, part of a 19-point, 9-rebound outing that kept Portland standing. And then there was Dame, who exploded for yet another supernova of a third quarter. Here's a lovely move using Enes Kanter to create some space. 3.
Give him 4.
And then there was McCollum, who has deserved always more credit than he's gotten. How great was this block on Paul George? Totally clean. And then he heads down to the other end for the pull-up 3. Meanwhile, on the other side, Russ was spending the second half going 0 for 7 from the field, the worst shooting half of his playoff career. At one point, ESPN's Royce Young overheard one of Portland's assistant coaches telling his players, "Don't go help on Russ. We want him to keep shooting."
Amen.
Still, the Blazers largely stayed away from rubbing it in the Thunder's faces. This tweet from Jusuf Nurkic, not noting how Westbrook had been quieted, that was probably about it, right? Instead, the Blazers did their talking in the interview room, and the subject wasn't the Thunder, but themselves. Here is McCollum.
We got swept last year. It was really embarrassing, and everybody talked about it. It was on TV every day. I went on TV, and they talked about us getting swept. We talked about me getting traded. Talked about, how we can't win together, all that stuff. We remember it, and we understand that feeling of going home early. I was fortunately, able to fly to Europe and see my brother play because the season ended so early. And I told him this year I ain't gonna be able to make it.
He is not.
Shout out to
busy
Eric.
right now.
Love that.
Eric McCollum.
That kind of resolve is so impressive, especially in the face of everything the Blazers have been through, especially as we've seen lesser things invade and fester and damage more successful teams. It turns out this is just the Portland way, and now it's carried them to the brink of the second round. So, Byron, how confident are you that using that resolve, that focus, Portland can actually shut this down, win Game 5, close the series?
Rachel, I am 75% sure that they will win Game 5 in Portland. Again, these two guys have went through a lot. And, they've shown their resiliency time and time again. And I think this year is their year. Everybody talk about you can't have two guards on the team that can lead them to a championship. Well, I go back to the 80s, and I remember a great player that I had to guard often named Isaiah Thomas, who was a monster. And then he had this other guy with him named Joe Dumars.
Yes, sir.
They were pretty damn good tandem. And these two guys, CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, really often remind me of those two. And I think they've led this team all season long. They've got them to the 3 spot in the playoffs. And I think they mentioned it. They had to sit down and talk to people all the time about being swept the last 2 years. And you just start building up, and it just keeps building up until you get a point in time in your career where you get a chance to, go on the court and do something about it. They'll do something about it this year, and I think they're going to advance.
Yeah, it's funny that, 2 years ago they got swept by the Warriors, and I don't think any of us.
Yeah.
Nah, that wasn't that bad.
But last year was really what
was
CJ
bad.
was talking about was
Yeah.
the last year.
That was bad.
'Cause that was embarrassing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They should have at least won a game.
Oh, yes.
But they didn't, and a lot of that had to do with adjustments. I feel like they didn't do adjustments, and the matchup wasn't quite there. This year, see, I felt like I was the only person in America who was confident the Blazers were going to win this series, and I think it goes down to Oklahoma City. This is not a good playoff team. They're a terrible three-point shooting team. They're a terrible free throw shooting team. They're terrible at execution, right? They play a very...
That's a lot of terribles.
I'm just saying, they play a
Tell
very...
us how you really feel.
But I understand what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
I understand what
we
you're saying.
just in the flow, but in terms of... Think about Damian Lillard's first half last night.
Right.
Terrible first half,
Yeah,
shooting
yeah.
the ball. But he found ways to say,
Yes.
okay, I'm not going to force it to get back in my rhythm. I'm going to find guys. I'm going to keep my head about me, and we're going to pull back into this. And they made their run, really, in that second quarter when they went from being down to being up and really taking the crowd out of the equation. These are things that Oklahoma City doesn't do. They play all 100% emotion and fury and all that, and that's all cool, and that's nice when they hit their threes like in Game 3. But again, we just established this is one of the worst three-point shooting teams
Well,
in the
that's
league.
what was funny. After they finally hit a bunch of those threes in Game 3, I heard a lot of people say, "Oh, see, they've, we talk about regression
Right.
to the mean. What's the regression up? What do you
Yeah,
guys always
regress
say?
up to the
regress
mean.
up to the mean." That actually wasn't them regressing
No.
up to the mean. The mean was what they did in
Yes.
Game 1 and 2. When they played Game 3, that was spectacular shooting for them.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
the fact that they didn't do that in Game 4 wasn't a shock
That was
to
the
me.
regression to the
Right,
mean.
right. That
Game
was-
4 was the regression to the mean.
I also